الحروب الاستباقية بين الواقع واختلاق الذرائع، غزو العراق بين لعبة الاستخبارات والحقائق، ما مصير العارفين بالحقائق، عين على حقيقة الاجتياحات الأمريكية للمنطقة بالوثائق. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
تحت هذا الشعار شنت جيوش متعددة الجنسيات بقيادة الولايات المتحدة الحرب على العراق في آذار مارس 2003، احتلال وعدوان دام 8 سنوات. 1,000,000 ونحو نصف المليون عراقي سقطوا إثر هذه الحرب. في المقلب الآخر حوالي 5,000 جندي أمريكي هي الحصيلة الرسمية. أما تكاليف الحرب الأمريكية على أفغانستان والعراق فبلغت ما يزيد عن 1,300 مليار دولار أمريكي. الشعب الأمريكي لا يعرف لماذا كذب نائب الرئيس الأمريكي ووزيرة الخارجية ومستشار الأمن القومي ووزير الدفاع على الشعب الأمريكي وعلى العالم كله. ما هي الأجندة الحقيقية؟ أسئلة طرحها مساعد وزير الخزانة الأمريكية في عهد الرئيس الراحل ريغان بول كريغ روبرتس. في أيلول سبتمبر 2002 قام مدير CIA آنذاك جورج تينت بإحاطة بوش بمعلومات استخباراتية مفادها أن صدام حسين لا يملك أسلحة دمار شامل بحسب ضابطي استخبارات سابقين رفيعي المستوى. بوش تغاضى عن هذه المعلومات على الرغم من صحتها بكل تفاصيلها. تينت توقف عن إثارة الموضوع. مسؤولة القناة الخلفية للعلاقة الأمريكية مع سفارة العراق سوزان لاندور تكشف من خلف ستار الاستخبارات الأمريكية معلومات تدحض كل ما صرحت به الإدارة الأمريكية آنذاك عن أحداث 11 من أيلول سبتمبر التي أدت إلى احتلال العراق. للمرة الأولى تتحدث لاندور في كتابها الإجحاف المتطرف عن وجود إطار لسلام شامل كان سيحقق كل أهداف أمريكا الكبرى في بغداد من دون سقوط حتى ضحية واحدة. Susan Lindauer, as a former CIA asset, how did you come to work? How did you get involved in the Iraq dossier?
I was recruited by the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency to set up contacts at the United Nations with Libya and Iraq in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. This was covert on the international scene in that no one in the media was allowed to know what I was doing. However, both the Iraqis and the Libyans were informed from the very first meeting that because of my deep opposition to sanctions and my deep opposition to war, I was willing to act as a back channel to Washington. And it was a fascinating experience.
What do you mean as a back channel? What did that involve?
A back channel transmitted messages from Washington to Baghdad or Tripoli and worked to get information from those governments, particularly regarding terrorism issues.
Mm-hmm. So you've been traveling back and forth to Iraq and Libya?
I was working at the United Nations level, so I was traveling to New York. Mm-hmm. Frequently. I would go about every 3 weeks. I would have meetings. I ended up having between 150 and 170 meetings with the Iraqi diplomats, and I had approximately 800 to 1,000 meetings with the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency. This was very intensive and it went on for a very long period of time. It made me the chief intelligence asset covering Iraq and Libya throughout the 90s, when they were pariah nations and no one else had contact with them.
Susan, what prompted the CIA to resort to such kind of step of trying to find a resolution for the conflict through people like you?
Well, initially the CIA tried to hold the sanctions into place, and for many years, of course, they succeeded. But by the end of the Clinton administration, the world community would no longer tolerate the suffering of the children. Literacy had been wiped out in Iraq in a single generation. 2 million Iraqi people had died from sanctions, including 1 million children under the age of 5. 11,000 Iraqis died every month.
So you were talking about the subject of sanctions. What were the sanctions for? Who did it target? Actually, usually people do sanctions against regimes, but not against the people of the country.
Sanctions on Iraq turned out to be the greatest weapon of mass destruction ever in the history of the world. Sanctions killed more people than all the nuclear bombs, all the wars. 2 million people died. And by the end of the Clinton administration, all of a sudden the international community woke up to know that genocide was going on. Of course, this had been happening for a long period of time, but all of a sudden the international community could no longer tolerate it. And at that point...
What did they do?
Pilots in Europe began to fly humanitarian flights into Baghdad International Airport. And they began to carry medicines and activists and food in violation of the sanctions. And it was just clear that the international community would not tolerate it any longer. Now, this became very important because it showed the CIA. The CIA did not want to make peace with Saddam. The CIA was never soft on Iraq or Saddam. But they realized the political reality was that the United States would have to alter its policy or would have to adjust in order to control the situation for the advantage of the United States. Everything that they did from this point on was how to secure maximum advantage for the United States as the sanctions were crumbling.
Susan, you're trying to show that the CIA is an agency that is very humanitarian in this sense, and that they want to do something to alleviate the pains of the people in Iraq.
Not at all, not at all. They wanted to control the agenda for the United States so that the United States would retain control in and access and power in post-sanctions Iraq.
From the Bush administration, Susan, what happened with the CIA and how was its role defined?
Well, it was very interesting. From the very start of the Bush administration, the CIA, unbeknownst to the rest of the world, the CIA began a dialogue for a comprehensive resolution of the conflict. The CIA recognized the sanctions were collapsing and they were trying to dominate the post-agenda, the post-sanctions agenda for the Iraqi government, and they began a covert dialogue with the Iraqi ambassador, Dr. Saeed Hassan, and with senior diplomats from the Iraqi embassy to figure out how much the Iraqis would give the United States so that America would be protected from punishment after 13 years of sanctions that had killed 2 million people.
And how much did the Iraqis offer?
The Iraqis offered everything. The CIA was amazed. This is something that you were never told happened. This is what was concealed from the whole world population.
What did they offer?
They offered, on weapons inspections, the world does not know that Iraq agreed to weapons inspections immediately. I gave 11 progress reports to my cousin, who was the chief of staff for George Bush. And at the very top of the government, Andrew Card, at the very top of the government, they were aware that Iraq most likely did not possess weapons of mass destruction because Iraq was so eager to get the weapons inspectors back into Baghdad. I had 11 progress reports telling them over and over again that it looked like Iraq was already clean. It looked like Iraq had nothing. We never believed that they did. That was a lie that they made up. We never believed that Iraq had weapons.
It was a pretext. What other offers did the Iraqis put on the table?
Well, this was very exciting, and this is important to consider in terms of Syria and Iran, because of course we started off looking only at weapons inspections, but very quickly we found commonality and other areas where we could have cooperation, which were very exciting. The peace that we were building turned out to be very exciting indeed. On the question of terrorism, Iraq was willing to allow the FBI to send a task force into Iraq with authorization to conduct terrorism investigations, interview witnesses, and make arrests. After 9/11, Iraq sweetened the deal by offering the United States financial documents on early al-Qaeda figures that would show where the finances were being kept. Saddam had hunted these groups. He was obsessed with radical Islam and conservative Islam, and he was concerned that they would try to take advantage of Iraq's poverty and the disenfranchisement from the people, from the government, the lack of central authority, and that the Islamists would try to set up a radical Islamic government. And so he chased these people. He was very aggressive in hunting them, and he knew all of their secrets, and he offered to give it all to the United States. The third thing that surprises people is that Iraq offered the United States preferential contracts to American corporations in every sector that the CIA demanded. The CIA demanded that all American corporations that had been operating in Iraq prior to the first Gulf War in 1990 would be allowed to return to Iraq at the same level of market share that they operated at before the first war. So all American corporations had to go back in. In addition, the healthcare system had been destroyed, so America demanded that the U.S. would have preferential contracts in hospital equipment and pharmaceuticals and just healthcare services overall. America demanded that telecommunications had been destroyed, so America demanded that American corporations would have preferential contracts for telecommunications equipment and services. They also demanded transportation. The Iraqis offered to buy 1 million American manufactured automobiles every year for 10 years.
Imagine, and they didn't take such offers.
Well, the CIA was building the strongest possible platform for the United States. And it is important to realize, and as an American, I acknowledge that diplomacy achieved far greater results than were demanded by the United Nations. The United States, the CIA demands far exceeded what was required by the United Nations for ending the sanctions. You can see this as a negative because it's unfair that the CIA was demanding more for the United States to stop Iraq from punishing Washington. Or you can look at it a different way.
Was Iraq punishing actually Washington?
Iraq was willing to do everything that Washington asked for. Everything.
So, I can see here that there are some parallels between what took place in Iraq and all these steps and offers and whatever, and what is taking place now in Syria. And also perhaps what also took place in Iran. And they opened the arms for the inspectors, and they were given some, they were making the reforms and everything, but still there are certain threats from here and there that a strike is going to target either Syria or Iran. And then what's going? Even the sanctions against Syria, who is it targeting? The regime or the people?
It is the people who suffer
bear the
from
brunt.
the sanctions.
Yes.
And sanctions amount to a collective punishment of the civilian population in straight violation of the Geneva Codes of War. And there is no way around it. Sanctions also cripple dialogue at exactly the moment that you need it the most. It freezes communications at a certain point, rather than allowing quid pro quo to shake things loose. And what you find is that when you start dialogue, if you're sincere about it, you will find many more points of commonality where you could actually achieve much greater results. And then the question becomes this: Are you the CIA? Are you the Washington and London and the G8? Do you really want solutions, or are you using this as a pretext to chase for war?
Okay.
Are you chasing war? Because if you want solutions in Iran, they are very easy to find. This is not a difficult debate. It is only difficult because we have created propaganda saying it is difficult, but it is not. There are solutions.
But do you think that the Iranians are that open for a dialogue with the U.S.?
I think that if we treat each other with greater respect, they would be open to dialogue. If we recognize that this is an ancient historical culture that is very cosmopolitan and urbane.
So we'll stop for a short break, Susan, and then we'll be back. A short break and we'll be back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Susan, you were talking about all these offers that were put on the table by the Iraqi regime to avoid such kind of war against Iraq, but yet the pretext was always weapons of mass destruction, and then the purpose was democracy. And was it the regime change that they were after?
Well,
after all,
the amazing
the toppling
thing
of
about
Saddam
it,
Hussein?
the worst part about this, in my opinion, was that Iraq offered major democratic reforms which would have achieved every goal of removing Saddam from power,
but did you
without
buy
firing a shot. Yes.
Because, you know, we know Saddam Hussein.
No. Saddam Hussein was a survivor. He could see the writing on the wall. He was looking for a way to step down and to move into the end of his phase of his life without this trouble.
And who would take over his son?
Absolutely. No. What they offered, what Iraq offered, which was very significant, and which would be very interesting to try in other countries. Iraq had its own idea. It offered to repatriate the Iraqi exiles and have them housed at embassy compounds, expanded embassy compounds, protected by embassy security. They would have had the rights to establish party headquarters and to campaign around the country, to have opposition newspapers and opposition radio stations, television stations, for the Iraqi people. There would have been elections within 18 months to 2 years that would have been supervised by the Iraqis said, why don't you bring in Jimmy Carter? Jimmy Carter is a famous former U.S. president who goes all over the world monitoring elections to make sure they're fair elections.
He went to Gaza, actually, and he monitored the elections there, and Hamas won, and he went to the occupied territories, and look what happened. So
but you see, if you are making a good faith, Iraq was making a good faith effort. It was the United States that did not want to have free elections in Iraq. They wanted to set up a puppet dictatorship, they thought. Now, whether they have succeeded or not is another matter. But they had an agenda, which was that the United States, wanted to choose who was going to be in power. They did not want to leave that decision to the Iraqi people.
And how does what happened in 9/11 tie deeply to what happened against Iraq?
It is very deeply connected to it.
How?
What you have asked me is, in April of 2001, I was summoned to my CIA handler's office, and he asked me to deliver a message to the Iraqi embassy. And the message was that the United States was seeking intelligence on airplane hijackings, a conspiracy to commit a terrorist attack on the United States. And by June, we knew the airplane hijacking conspiracy would involve an aerial strike on the World Trade Center specifically. We knew exactly what was going to happen. And my CIA handler told me that he had a message for the Iraqis. If Iraq discovered intelligence about this conspiracy and failed to deliver it to the United States through my back channel, that's what it was for. I was supposed to carry these messages to the Iraqi embassy, and if they had anything to tell us, they would give it to me and I would give it to the CIA. So this is what it was properly used for. But if they found this intelligence and failed to communicate it to us, then the United States would declare war on Iraq, and they would bomb them back to the Stone Age harder than they'd ever been bombed before. Now, by this time, Iraq had been bombed pretty hard. So trying to communicate to them that this would be the worst thing that had ever happened to them was fairly difficult. If you've already murdered 2 million children, you've already wiped out the hospitals and the education system, what more can you do to somebody? But the United States was determined to communicate that whatever they could do,
so
they
you
would.
delivered that message. How was your tone?
Well, when I first delivered the message, I was very polite to the Iraqis. We were having a very productive conversation about how to resolve this, and I said, hey, could you please send a message to Baghdad? Send them a cable that we're looking for any intelligence on this airplane hijacking, actionable intelligence that would help us stop the attack. And I said, you know, I was very polite about it. And Iraq said, sure, we'll be happy to cooperate. They had always cooperated in the past. Like I said, Saddam Hussein was one of our best sources on anti-terrorism intelligence in the 1990s because he recognized that this was something that he could attach himself to Washington on. And I was willing to communicate it, and so they were very forthcoming all the time. They were never difficult.
Yes, what happened next, Susan?
I went back to my CIA handler and he said, so, what did Iraq say about my threat? And I said, well, I didn't actually threaten them. I said, would you please get the information for us? And they said, sure. We'll see if we have anything. If we have it, we'll let you know. My CIA handler blew a gasket. He was furious. He stormed around the room, around the conference table, shouting obscenities about the Arabs, which are not printable.
Yes.
Every dirty word you can think of to describe Arab people. Okay. And that he demanded it. He said he was not asking them. He was demanding that they must give it to us. And that I must go back, and this is very important, I must tell the Iraqis the threat of war originated at the highest levels of government, above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State. That was the exact wording that I was supposed to use. Above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State. Now, in the United States, there are only three men. President George Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Those are the only people. And this was, I must be very clear, those people already knew about the 9/11 conspiracy in its precise detail. They knew that there was an airplane hijacking conspiracy and it would strike the World Trade Center. I am on record telling my friends, and this is how we got the story out. I told civilians that it would happen at the end of the summer or early fall.
How did they know? I mean, your handler, Dr. Richard Fuse, how did he get, what's his source of information about the hijackings and what's going to take place against the World Trade Center on 9/11?
On the day of 9/11, he revealed his sources to me. He told me, he said to me, how often, he was referring to the video of the airplanes flying over the waters and striking the buildings. And he said, Susan, how often do you think a man and woman are standing on a street corner with a video camera queued up, ready to record a car accident? He said, Susan, it never happens. At best, their arms are whipping around fast, and the camera, the video is blurry, and you have to slow it down to see what actually happens, and even then you're catching only the end of the accident. So he said this man and woman were Mossad agents, and they have been waiting on the street corner since early morning, ready to record this attack. And I said to him, you mean I have been looking for this attack, for intelligence from the Iraqis all summer long, and the Israelis knew about this attack and they didn't tell us? And they didn't tell us anything? Because I had been hunting for this from Baghdad. And he said, and the phone went dead immediately. The phone cut off. And I called him back, and he was very calm, and he said, Susan, we must never discuss this ever again.
And you never discussed it ever
We
again?
never did. However, George Bush admitted something very important. He said that on the day of 9/11, he said that he had seen video of the first airplane striking the World Trade Center before he went into the classroom where he was reading the book to the children.
To the children, right.
Okay. And then my cousin, Andrew Card, is the man who leans down and whispers in his ear that a second airplane has struck the World Trade Center towers. And so that's my cousin who does that. and that's Andy Card. And George Bush indicated that he'd already seen video of the first flight. That was taken by the Mossad, and that is the same video footage that my CIA handler referred to, and he identified them as Mossad.
Why were you considered and accused of being an unregistered Iraqi agent to the Iraqi intelligence and for the nation of Iraq?
The reason that you have never heard the truth about Iraqi pre-war intelligence is that I requested to testify on Capitol Hill so that I could bring this information to the public domain. 30 days after I made the request to testify before Congress, I woke up one morning and the FBI was on my doorstep, pounding on my door with an arrest warrant. And I became distinguished as the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act. I was held without trial for 5 years. They refused to give me a trial, though I demanded one constantly. I never gave up my right to a trial. I said, if you think I'm guilty, then you must present this to a jury, and you must present, you show your evidence and I will make my defense. But I have the right to a trial. And the United States government said, no, you don't.
Did you get a trial?
Never. I was never allowed to have a trial.
Up till now,
trial. No trial.
Whatsoever.
I was never convicted.
You were released without
I was
a trial.
locked up in prison on a Texas military base, Carswell Air Force Base, outside of Fort Worth. And the government fought to detain me, for the right to detain me, 10 years with no trial.
I'm terribly sorry, but we have, because I believe that time ran up. And thank you very much, Susan Lindauer, and we promise the audience that we're going to see you again. Many thanks indeed for joining us. Take care. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل، تابعونا من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.